Tampa Bay Buccaneers add 3 more weapons to the team on day 2 of the draft. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this bonus episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen or view every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I'd like to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show, become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. A couple of really solid third-round picks. That is coming up in just a little bit, as well as Jason Licht absolutely crushing it in this draft. But let's start things off the way the Buccaneers started their night off, getting their edge rusher. So Western Kentucky's Marshawn Kneeland went one pick before the Buccaneers were able to make their first selection of Friday night, going to the Dallas Cowboys. That is a player that I thought the Buccaneers would target. Instead, the Bucs got Alabama Crimson Tide edge rusher Chris Braswell. So Braswell is a player that I mentioned a few times on the show, but I honestly didn't think he would last until pick 57. So he ran a 4.6 40 with a 1.59 split. His initial burst is phenomenal. He's coming off of a season with Alabama where he had 8 sacks, 41 tackles, an interception that was returned for a touchdown, 33 hurries, and 10.5 tackles for loss. His bread and butter, though, is his combination of speed and strength. His bull rush has the momentum to overcome blockers that are much bigger than he is. He's 6'3", 255, but he's still a bit raw. With Will Anderson Jr. and some of the other pass rushers ahead of him at Alabama, last year was really the first time that Braswell had an opportunity to be a primary pass rusher for Bama. So he needs to work a little bit on his bend. He's a little stiff off of the edge at times. But with all of that said, the ceiling for Braswell is extremely high. You go back to the pre-draft process when I was talking a lot about Chop Robinson's athletic ceiling. Braswell is in the same vein. Some of his traits you just can't teach, and that's what the Buccaneers are going to build on. One of the more underrated parts of Braswell's game is his ability to stick with tight ends and running backs when he has to drop in coverage, something that Todd Bowles is going to ask him to do quite a bit in this defense. Those natural instincts are one of the most intriguing parts of what Braswell brings to the Buccaneers. Now, I'm not sure if he's going to be a locked and loaded starter day one the way Graham Barton is, but you're going to see him heavily used in a rotation with Joe Tryon-Shoyinka and Randy Gregory and Anthony Nelson and those guys, but his ceiling puts him up there with Yaya Diaby and potentially even better. When it comes to his raw athletic score, Braswell gets knocked for being a little bit undersized, but his speed grade was elite, and that's something that the Bucs desperately need off of the edge. His limited experience at Alabama makes him that raw prospect that I mentioned, but under Bowles, Braswell has the foundation to be really, really dangerous in this defense if they can get him coached up properly. I have all the confidence in the world that the Bucs can do exactly that. So by week 5, week 6, you're going to see him as a guy that's probably just behind Yaya Diaby on a week-to-week basis in terms of defensive snap counts. And he's really, you would hope and you would believe that he's really going to take a stranglehold on that starting edge position opposite of Yaya Diaby. Want to jump in the chat real quick. Kathy in the chat says, after listening to Spy Tech, I could sense that Nealon was the first choice, but pivoted seamlessly to Braswell. Now, full disclosure, because of all of the things that I have going on with the network and the website, I have not been able to sit down and listen to the press conferences with Spy Tech and Jason Licht and those guys. I've seen clips here and there, so I'll get a better kind of take on what you're referring to while I'm at work in the morning. I'll listen to those while I'm out and about. But it wouldn't surprise me if Nealon was the first choice, but I think you could view this almost as a Nealon was 1A, Braswell was 1B kind of guy, that the Bucs were going to be happy regardless of either player that they got. And I think they got into a situation where they felt that they weren't going to have to make a move or make a trade. I'll talk more about trades coming up in a little bit, but they weren't going to have to make that aggressive move because they felt that one of the two of them was going to be there, probably going to lose one of them to the Dallas Cowboys, which I even tweeted out, turnabout's fair play. Graham Barton could have gone to the Cowboys. They trade out. The Bucs are able to snag him. Then on day two, the Cowboys were right there to scoop up Marshawn Nealon. But I really, really like what I have seen so far out of Chris Braswell. Much like Graham Barton, I'm going to go into, Braswell and Barton and these other guys that the Bucs have drafted and really hone in on them. A lot of these guys, during my preparation of this, I wasn't watching full games. I was watching bits and pieces of games. I'm going to sit down and watch full games and really be able to figure out what I think the Bucs are going to be able to do with some of these players. But I'll listen to Jason Licht and John Spytek tomorrow morning when I am able to. We got Fire the Cannons, Go Bucs in the chat. Says great draft picks. I really, really like what I've seen from the Bucs so far. Fausto back after a late night last night. He says Light is lighting them up. And then Fire the Cannons, Go Bucs says we're not worried about the Falcons. We'll see. The Falcons, I don't think they're having a great draft by any means, but they still had a lot of talent on that roster from last year. I think Raheem Morris is going to be a pretty good head coach, finally getting that second opportunity. We'll see how that all shakes out. And then we got Randy. Randy just popped in and said, I made the live. Fire the Cannons and Lakita. Finally, things are happening. Things are happening. And there are two more draft picks to talk about. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find the quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode of your favorite Locked On podcast is brought to you by the best meal kit service in the game, Home Chef. No more having to answer the dreaded question, what are we going to do for dinner tonight? Thanks to Home Chef and their chef-designed recipes that are delivered directly to my door, all pre-packaged, pre-portioned. They even peel the garlic cloves for you. And each recipe, one of my favorites, black and mahi, comes with a full page of easy-to-read instructions that include customization options and pictures to guide you along the way through the step-by-step process so you don't have to ask, is that what chard looks like? I cannot recommend Home Chef enough, especially right now, because for a limited time, Home Chef is giving Locked On listeners 18 free meals, free dessert for life, and of course, free shipping on your first box if you head to homechef.com/lockedon today. That's homechef.com/lockedon for 18 free meals and free dessert for life. Yes, you heard that right. Homechef.com/lockedon. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert.
Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. I clicked the wrong button. It happens. Everydayers, make sure you are coming back on Monday. I might do a live episode tomorrow. I'm not sure yet. Let's see how day 3 goes. But if you're subscribed to the YouTube, turn on those notifications so you know if I do go live, or if you follow me on Twitter, I'll put it on there. But for sure, we're back on Monday to put a nice tidy bow on this NFL draft. In the meantime, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Al Bundy in the chat says Falcons are pretty good. Grabbing Penix when Cousins and his $100 million guarantee just joined the Falcons. Grabbing Rook when Jerzon Newton was available. Falcons are very impressive. Now, Al, I did say that I didn't like their draft, but they were still a talented football team last year. I think they upgraded at head coach. I'm not going to dismiss them entirely. I'm also not jumping on the bandwagon where people are calling them the favorites to win the division either. But, you know, we'll see how all of this pans out. I'll talk more about how these picks are going to pan out coming up later in this show. But in the third round, Jason Licht continued to stay patient and ended up with 2 more impact players, starting with safety Tykee Smith out of Georgia. So Smith led the Bulldogs with 4 interceptions last season, which was tied for the 3rd most in the SEC. And he was one of only 3 players in college football last year with at least 4 interceptions and at least 2 sacks. And although he's listed as a safety, Smith took the vast majority of his snaps at Georgia out of the nickel corner position, which is likely where he lands with the Bucs. Now, they brought in Javier Thomas from Houston, Bryce Hall from the Jets, but I think Smith beats out Thomas for that starting slot corner role, and Hall just provides depth behind McCollum and Jamel Dean. We know Jamel Dean, I'm not going to say that he's injury prone. I'm just going to say he doesn't ever start a full season. This allows the Bucs to move Christian Izien back to safety and provide some depth there, which is where he started before moving up to that nickel corner spot last year. And according Al Bundy in the chat, I see him. I was being sarcastic, LOL. I know. I just wanted to clarify just in case there was any misunderstanding, because even if you didn't misunderstand what I said, other people might. But back to Tykee Smith. According to Pro Football Focus, Smith's coverage grade from 2023 was an 85.8, and his overall defensive grade was an 84. He racked up 53 tackles and allowed just 3 touchdowns compared to his 4 interceptions. He's also one of the more sure tacklers in this class. When you take a look at corners and safeties, he does not get deterred when going up against bigger tight ends. He ran a 4.46 40 at the combine and finished with a raw athletic score of 7.43, which isn't great, but that's thanks in large part to his average vertical and slightly smaller size. Now, I talked a lot on this show leading up to the draft about prototypical Todd Bowles corners, and Smith is not that. He is smaller than what Bowles generally looks for. He's 5'10", 200 pounds, 72-inch wingspan, but his speed and tackling abilities more than make up for it, and his ability to come in off the edge on blitzes and get after the quarterback has got to be a big reason why Todd Bowles liked him so much. There were even, I can't remember who said it. It was someone on NFL Network, for those of you that watch the broadcast, but they even said that Tykee Smith gives off big Antoine Winfield Jr. vibes. That's a pretty ringing endorsement. I'll take that every day of the week. The Bucs then picked shortly after they selected Tykee Smith and took Washington Huskies wide receiver Jalen McMillan. 6'1", 200 pounds. McMillan ran a 4.47 at the combine, has a 37-inch vertical. He was the final piece of the Washington receiving trio that helped the Huskies reach the national championship last year that was taken in this draft. He had a little bit of a down year in 2023, 45 receptions for 553 yards and 5 touchdowns compared to 2022 when he really went off. 79 receptions, 1,098 yards, and 9 touchdowns, but he did finish last season with a 12.3 yards per reception average. He's really impressive in his route running. He has a knack for finding advantages against a defensive player to get himself open or put himself in position to win the rep. But part of the reason that he had that regression last year was due to injury problems. He only played in 11 games. He missed 4 games for Washington last year, and he was limited in quite a few of those 11 that he did play in because he suffered a knee injury in week 3. So don't take a look at his 500 receiving yards and his 5 touchdowns as a knock for, oh, well, the Bucs reached on him or this, that. No, there were extenuating circumstances that caused his numbers to drop so much last year. But his raw athletic score was an 8.67. That's 452nd out of over 3,400 wide receivers drafted since 1987, and Pro Football Focus gave him an overall grade of 70.3 last season. Again, down from 2022 when his grade was a 77.5. A lot of people point to McMillan's abilities that as a reason that he's projected as a wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside. And that's exactly, you guys know that I've been pounding the table. If the Bucs are going to bring in a wide receiver, it needs to be a guy that comes in as a wide receiver 3 this year, but can become a wide receiver 2 if Chris Godwin leaves. He can play outside. He can be a mismatch out of the slot. He can do anything that you need him to do at the wide receiver position with his smaller size compared to Mike Evans or Chris Godwin, except he really can't take the top off the defense. Even though he ran a really solid 40, he doesn't have that overdrive gear to really kick in another level of speed and take the top off the defense and really stretch them out. He can high point the ball. He can win tough battles over the middle. He just doesn't have that over the top speed that you would kind of like. But then again, I go back, you can even go back to my running back conversation. The Bucs need to bring in something that they don't already have. They have over the top speed. What they needed was somebody with McMillan's size. Again, he's smaller than Godwin or Evans, but he's bigger than what they have already. He's a really, really solid option. He's not small by any means. He's just smaller than Evans or Godwin. Great hands, refined route running. This is a locked and loaded plug and play player. Right before I went live, I saw Trevor Sikkema on Twitter just gushing over McMillan's fit with this Buccaneers offense. Liam Cohen is really going to be able to get him involved. He is going to fit in really well. So 4 picks, 4 impact players for Jason Licht. I'm going to jump into the chat one more time real quick before before we move on. Zach in the chat says, Jalen McMillan is a steal. All I got to say, he would have been higher if it wasn't for injury. I agree. I think he probably would have gone a little bit closer to his fellow Washington wide receivers. Definitely, you're looking at least early third round, maybe would have even snuck into the back end of the second round. This ain't that in the chat says, worries me Braswell was only a rotational player. He was only a rotational player because of the level of talent that they had at Alabama, is really what that boils down to. I talked about Braswell at the top of the show. Once this is over, you can go back and check it out, or check it out on the podcast feed. He really didn't have a ton of opportunity until last year, so I wouldn't worry about that at all. The athletic ability is there. The traits are there. The strength is there. The speed is there. Braswell is going to fit in just fine with the Buccaneers. Al Bundy in the chat, this year's draft already looks potentially better than the drafts in the past 3 years. Follows that up with knock on wood. Ooh, we'll revisit that. I'll make a note. We'll revisit that, Al Bundy. But so far, I really, really like what I have seen out of the Buccaneers. But the final day of the NFL draft is now less than 12 hours away. We talk about that coming up next on Locked On Bucs. We've all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is just not looking good. You're feeling low. You're not sure that you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift up your head, and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime, with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There is so much to do, like play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. You can make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball, and you can charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Three more picks for the Buccaneers with, I forgot to say, wrapping things up on this bonus episode of Locked On Bucs. But three more picks for the Buccaneers with 125, 220, and 246 coming up on Saturday. But before we get too deep into that, I have to commend Jason Licht for just a moment. Through the first three rounds, we have seen teams jump all over the place, which is completely fine. Don't get me wrong. If there's a guy that you want, make the move, go up, go get him. If there's nobody sitting there that you feel that you really need to get, move down, collect some extra picks, grab a couple more opportunities to find someone that's really going to fit your team. You have a team like the Panthers, though, that makes a great trade moving down and then turns around and less than 10 minutes later severely overpays to move right back up. Jason Licht has played this draft to perfection. He stayed at 26. He didn't panic. He didn't freak out. And he got a potentially elite offensive lineman to help protect Baker Mayfield and help the run game. With all the absolutely crazy movement and positional runs to start day two, again, he didn't panic and just let the draft fall to him, and he gets Chris Braswell to come in and help the edge rush. 2 picks, the 2 biggest positions of need, addressed with impact players without panicking. Then stays at 89, stays at 92, and finds himself a potentially starting nickel corner, or at the very least, a rotational guy that is good in zone, good in man coverage, can come in and blitz off the edge or out of that slot corner position. Then he gets a legit wide receiver 3 to add to Godwin and Evans. The Bucs did not have a ton of picks coming into this draft, and Licht has managed to maximize every one of them with 4 immediate impact players in the first 4 picks. So I wanted to take a moment and just say that Jason Licht, I feel, has done a tremendous job. And again, we will go back and we will revisit this draft class in a couple of years. Al Bundy, you're saying that it might be the best one that they've had in the last 3 years. We're going to have to revisit it. We're going to have to see how these guys pan out, because so far, all of them look phenomenal on paper. They got to do it on the field. Now, as for pick 125, the Buccaneers still have some options, but I think this is where you're going to see the running back pick for the Buccaneers. My guy, Audric Estime. I see, I saw somebody in here, Malglinator, says, I need Audric Estime on this team. Yeah, I would love that. And as I told somebody on Twitter, I promised my Notre Dame loving son that if the Bucs drafted Audric Estime, I would get him an Estime jersey. But he is still out there. Ray Davis from Kentucky is still out there. Jalen Wright from Tennessee, Braylon Allen out of Wisconsin, Bucky Irving, Tyrone Tracy, they are all still out there at running back. And these guys are not going to last until pick 220 when the Bucs pick in the 6th round. I think if they're going to add a rookie, which they need to the running back room, it has to be in the 4th round, unless they're giving up future capital to move back into the draft, at the top of the 5th round, something like that. The Bucs have to take a running back in the 4th round if it's going to be a guy that is going to be a part of the rotation and really legitimately be able to help this football team. Otherwise, you're back to looking to the free agents, because you got Rachaad White, you got Chase Edmonds, and after that, you have Sean Tucker, who didn't do anything. You have Patrick Laird, who is a special teams guy, period. You have to bring in a running back, and if you're going to do it, it's going to have to be a pick 125. My biggest needs coming into this draft were edge rusher, offensive line, running back, wide receiver, corner, safety, and linebacker. They have checked off 4 of those boxes, arguably 5. If you want to count Tykee Smith as a twofer, running back is the biggest remaining glaring hole for the Bucs, and I would like to think that they will address that first, but the draft, as always, is unpredictable, and you may see a run before the Bucs even get a chance to take one. As for later round guys, it's really tough to project. You're looking for depth. You're looking for special teams contributors. I still like Steele Chambers, the linebacker out of Ohio State, as a potential 6th round guy. Michael Barrett out of Michigan, he's another potential 6th round guy that can fall to them. Somehow TJ Tampa is still out there. DJ James, the corner from Auburn, Cam Hart, the corner from Notre Dame. Those are later round. Those are 6th, 7th round potential corners that the Bucs could bring in. I don't think TJ Tampa lasts to 125. And if he does, then you have yourself a little bit of a conundrum. Do you go with a running back? Do you go with TJ Tampa? What do you do in that situation? But come day 3, as if the rest of the draft wasn't already a massive gamble, you're throwing a dart the length of a football field and hoping that you land on the board. That's it. You might find a diamond in the rough. You might find a depth piece that helps on special teams, but you're probably not finding a starter or a big-time role player after the 4th round. And I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but it's rare. And we love to look back on those, and it's like, look at that draft steal. Look at who they got and when they got him. Tom Brady, of course, pick 199. We've heard that a billion times. But more often than not, you think about how many of these players are drafted on day 3 and how many of them actually turn into bona fide starters, and even more than that, turn into Pro Bowlers, potential Hall of Famers, guys like that. It's tough to nail down. So temper expectations, but hopefully whoever the Bucs bring in can at least help the team in some way, shape, or form. I'm going to jump in the chat one more time before we get out of here. Al Bundy says, I would rather have Jalen Wright. I thought he was going to be the pick at 89. I like Jalen Wright. You guys know that I'm partial to Audric Estime just because I love so much of what I saw out of him. I would not dislike a different running back being taken, depending on the running back. There's still players that I would take over Audric Estime, but he's my personal favorite. Sal 319, what about the back from Tennessee? That's Jalen Wright. I did mention him. Neil says move up. They don't have a lot of capital to move up with unless you're trading away futures. I think at this point, Jason Licht's just going to continue to do what he's done. Let the draft fall to him, see what happens. If there's a big run on running backs and there aren't any available, he might trade back and pick up an additional pick in the 5th round, which he doesn't currently have, or maybe a pick next year. Rick Dog says tight end we need. I don't know if I would throw that. It would be nice to add an additional one. I will say that. I don't think that it's going to break this football team if the Bucs come away from this draft without taking a tight end. You have Otten, you have Payne Durham. It would be nice to bring someone in to alleviate a little bit of the responsibilities of Cade Otten. But you have Kieft as your blocking tight end. You got Durham and Otten as your pass-catching tight ends. And then there's still a couple of tight ends out there on the free agent market that you could get for dirt cheap, or they might see a tight end that they're going to give a shot in undrafted free agency. Al Bundy says, I have a feeling we won't get a tight end. They might. And again, it really boils down to who's available at the time, and they might go with the undrafted free agent route. Sal says, no, how do you feel about the Tennessee running back? I like him. There was one episode where I talked about him pretty in depth. I would take Estime over Jalen Wright, but if Jalen Wright is the addition, again, he adds some explosiveness, he adds some grit, some power, some strength to this Buccaneers offense, which I'm all about. So I certainly wouldn't be disappointed if the Bucs took Jalen Wright. I would prefer Audric Estime. I think if I was gonna, put a rubber stamp on a name of a running back that the Bucs are going to come away with, I still feel like it's going to be Ray Davis out of Kentucky just because of the connection that he has with Liam Cohen. That seems to me like the most obvious choice. But we'll see how it all shakes out. That is going to do it for my time on this bonus episode. Again, I might come live after day 3 of the NFL draft. We'll see how things shake out and how the day goes. If not, I'll be back on Monday to talk about the rest of the Buccaneers draft haul. And then we're going to start deep diving on some of these guys that the Buccaneers drafted. In the meantime, check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Follow on Twitter at LockedOnBucs, at JYarcho_Bucs. Become an insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.